Hi folks, welcome to the shop. I just wanted to quickly tell you about an eye making technique that I've been doing. It's very inexpensive. It yields really nice eyes. I've been doing this for about 25 years. I learned this at Jim Henson's Creature Shop a million years ago. But it's very, very simple. And fundamentally, all you do is you start out with now these are for human eyes, which are about 26 millimeters in diameter, which for those of us who are American, who ironically still use the imperial system, even though we fought 2 wars to get out of it, it is about 1 inch in diameter. And the other thing that I use is a 1/2 inch marble. It's that simple. These 2 items and some other materials like silicone and some casting resin and fundamentally my printer is how I do these. So I'll show you a series of stills, and really what this enables you to do is with a down payment of maybe $50, you'll be able to make probably about 60 to 70 eyes. This mold is a really old mold. I've had this literally for about 20 years. I made a gang mold really of the lenses, which are the little clear parts, which are originally cast from this. The other thing I'd like to mention as we go into this video is the fact that these images are from a 27-year-old digital camera, so they're very low res and old images, but they get the point across.
Okay, so let's get started. This is what this thing will eventually look like. It's a pretty simple technique. So there are a few things that we've got to overcome, but the obstacles are not that difficult. And you'll be able to come up with these extremely realistic eyes. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to start out with a small plastic ball. This is 1 inch or 26 millimeters in diameter. You can use plastic, you can use wood, you can use literally anything you can get your hands on, as long as it's roughly the same size. Okay, generally the first thing I do is drill a hole through the entire ball, but you don't have to do that if it's a bead, obviously. I use usually an 1/8 inch hole or drill bit for this. The next thing I do is stick a stick in the back to use it as a handle and sand down. As you can see, there's sandpaper on the base. What I do that makes it extremely easy is to just put sandpaper on the bottom there. I usually use a pretty high grit sandpaper, which you can sand away at the bottom, and it'll make it this nice smooth flat surface. Okay, so here we have our nice clear smooth flat spot on the base. I painted it a little bit so you can see it a little easier, but you can see it's got a nice smooth area where we can now glue on what we need to do for the next thing. So it's prepared. Our base is prepared. The next thing is the marble. So now we have a base and a marble, and we want to take a mold of the base and the marble, but we only want the top third or so of the marble. That was an interesting thing that I had to overcome in my workshop, so I came up with a pretty decent idea.
How to mold something like this. Now, I've been getting a lot of requests for how to make a simple silicone mold, and I'll show you that pretty soon. But what I wanted to show you right now is how I came about making these impressions with something like this in a silicone mold. The easiest way to demonstrate this is with any simple cup. If you have a simple paper cup, all you want to do for something that you want to take a mold of, you simply glue it into the bottom of the cup. So I would take my ball with the flat on it, glue it onto the bottom of the cup in such a way that it's relatively centered. I would just use hot glue to do that. If you can see, I don't know if you can see past my thumb. I'll use a smaller finger. So it's relatively in the middle, and you simply hot glue it to the base. So that'll give you a little bit of an up base like this, which is no big deal. You just cut that off. You can trim it with a knife or just some sandpaper or whatever you want to do. Then the other part is, how do we cut a marble to make that into one of these little lenses? Let me see if I can find a lens. I don't really see any laying around. Here's an old one with a thing on it. There's clay all over it and everything else. But the lens should be clear. It's usually made of a clear resin, and it's only a half an inch and half a sphere. So how do we make that out of this? The easy way, which came to me eventually, and this was really the breakthrough, this is a paper cup. All I need to do is cut a hole in the bottom of the cup, stick this in from the back side until a half an inch protrudes from the bottom of the cup. And then hot glue that in, and there you've got just this part sticking out of the bottom of the cup. And with the hot glue, you now have a liquid safe spot so that when you pour in the silicone, it'll fill in and the depression will be on the silicone, and it's perfectly smooth. This is I think I got about 100 marbles from the dollar store for $1. And they're perfect. They're glass, so they're glass smooth. It's pretty great. Now, for the rest of the eyeball, you can literally use, and they're half an inch, you can literally use anything. These are little plastic balls, which is easy because I could sand it down very quickly. People use wood, people use beads. The other nice thing about this technique is literally if you can find something that's half the diameter of the base, you can make this into any size you want. You can use beads, which are super tiny, all sorts of things. Please note, the lens should only be less than half the diameter of the ball. I do about 1/3 of the diameter of this marble because that'll give me my half inch, but more importantly, it's not a full half sphere. The half sphere, here's an old one that's clearly gone yellow, but half or more of the sphere will not look like a realistic eye. So that's the other thing. You want something that is a much lower, all these are really old. You want one that's much lower, like the top third of the ball, if that makes sense. Okay?
Okay, so here we have our plastic or paper cup, whatever it is, with a hole in the bottom, and I have both the base glued in and the marble sticking up through the bottom when the hole that I cut, and glued around the base of that, around the outside of the marble, not inside the cup, but outside the cup, underneath on the bottom, so that when I pour the silicone in, it won't leak past it. Now here's another old mold, and this one you can see this slight depression on one side and the deeper base where the other side is. I like these molds that are one piece, so you have, okay, here's one eye. You've got the iris for it as well as the base for it, all in one mold, which makes it really easy. Then what you do is pour these up out of resin. When you pour up the resin, now you have a clear resin cornea or iris cover, and the base, which I usually pour up in just the regular resin color, which is usually kind of an off-white tone, which works very well. The resin will harden up into a hardened plastic, and the clear is usually a little tougher to get. So the clear is the one that we'll go into a little bit more detail. Usually I use a form of Envirotex, which is an epoxy. To get the bubbles out is extremely important, and each different resin has its own ways of getting the bubbles out. So you want a slow setting resin which won't harbor those bubbles as well. The slower it kicks, the more those bubbles will go up. The other thing you want to avoid is resin that will yellow very quickly, unless that's what you want to go for. But the yellow will eventually become amber, which will taint your color.
The last thing I want to show you is you can literally make these into anything you want. This is just a printout that I did on photographic paper. You can see it's since then it's gotten ink on it and everything else. These I've had these laying around for literally 20-25 years. The one that I'm showing in the video is made with these eyes. All this is an image of an eyeball, of a close-up of an iris that I took off Photoshop, and I zoom in and I take out the highlights. If you notice, if you're looking at an eyeball really close, you'll see where the light hits the eyeball. You want one with as few highlights as you can find, and then you just go in and you paint those out. You zoom way in on it in Photoshop, paint it out, then copy it, make it print out to 1/2 inch in diameter for each one, and look at how many I printed out. and they look extremely realistic when they're underneath the lens. Will give it that bubble effect, and it looks so good.
Another thing that I want to show you is how I do these irises. Literally, I just print them out after I Photoshop them, and I have a little mention about that in the very beginning, is to take out those hot spots in the Photoshop, and then print them out so they're ½ inch. Then just cut them out and glue them, and I usually use super glue to the back side of that semicircle iris that we made. Now, if you see, now you're getting that wonderful lens effect. Look at how much more realistic this looks than what the flat piece of paper did. This is 100% of the effect. You can also paint on the back side of the iris, although it's harder, but you can do that too, although I've had really good success, and these have literally been in movies, with the paper. The last thing you have to do to assemble the eye is to glue the iris with the paper onto the base in that center spot. And this is very easy. I usually use nail polish because it's a slow-acting, semi-clear thing, very much like super glue. Or, of course, you can always use super glue. Mostly just don't glue your hand to it, as long as it's clear. The next step is to take a piece of thread. Now, I use literally any type of thread. This is dollar store thread. What I do is I hang it, stretch it, and then scrape it with a razor blade to make it fray and break apart. And eventually, I take those little fibers and I lay them over the base of the eyeball, use that same clear nail polish, and brush it over the top of it. And that'll help you maneuver and move these wonderful veins, and it'll hide those veins into it. So the more nail polish, the better. You'll kind of get this nice coating to it. This is after it's all the way done, but we're not quite there yet. The other thing, the last step we have to do is blend that sphere part on the top with the sphere on the base. That is, the iris has to blend in to the rest of the eye. It does have a corneal bump, which is important for realism. Here it is from the side. You can clearly see there's that little bump area where we have to fill that in, smooth that out so it transitions smoothly from one to the next without that little shoulder bump. You can, if you really take your time, blend this out with sandpaper, but a much easier technique. Again, using our friend the dollar store, you can usually pick up some clear silicone caulk. That's what I've done here. All I've done is taken a little bead of silicone caulk, put it around the base, lick my finger, and wipe it around. It's probably a better idea to use gloves. But the point is, now we have this smooth transition from the corneal bump onto the base of the eye. Now, don't use a lot of silicone here. You just want to blend it in that little, maybe 1/16 of an inch to blend it in. The very last stage, which will clear up everything and make it look much clearer, is using, again, that clear nail polish. Just coat it with the clear nail polish. Just keep laying it down. And what it'll do is it'll slowly fill in all those little scratches and all those little bubbles and anything else and make it an absolutely glass smooth sphere. It'll also give it that wet look. It'll also protect it for quite some time.